Hey everyone, I'm so glad to be back with you guys again today. For today, I thought that we could talk all about honey. We're going to talk a little bit about honey, its uses, some of the things that it's known for, maybe some of the things you use honey for. So I also want to talk a little bit about the honeybee today. And I'm hoping that you're able to actually learn something new from our discussion. As always, you're always welcome to leave comments and start conversations between me, you, and other fellow participants that are watching these videos. So I want to just share a couple of cool, fun facts with you guys that I actually found about honey. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to do a little bit of trivia. Okay, so here we go. Did you know that honey never spoils? So think about all of the things that you've heard that never spoil, right? I've heard things like Twinkies never spoil. Actually, I can't think of any other thing that I've heard that doesn't spoil other than Twinkies. So if you were actually to put honey into an airtight container, it would actually never spoil. Personally, I've actually seen honey that kind of looks like crystals over time as it ages a little bit. So honey, because of the way it naturally is, it's naturally acidic. Kind of like a pine tree is naturally acidic, right? So because it is acidic, it also is low in moisture. It makes it a really bad place for bacteria to grow. Bacteria likes a lot of moisture, bacteria likes a lot of darkness and things like that. So with it being naturally acidic and not much moisture, it just doesn't really grow. I don't think that you'll ever see moldy honey because it's just not possible. Okay, but I want to talk a little bit about the honeybee. So the honeybee is extremely important. In recent years, a lot of people have really made a push to save the honeybees. Sadly, the population of honeybees is actually declining quite a bit. So you can actually call a beekeeper if you have a problem with honeybees around your yard, or if they bother you and they're in, your yard or on your property. They will actually come free of charge, and they will collect the honeybees and they'll actually rehome them. A lot of these people that will come for free and remove your bees are beekeepers that often collect the honey, maybe selling it at the local market or using it for other things. So I want to talk a little bit more about the bee because they are quite magical. Okay, they turn nectar from a flower into honey, which is good like on all the sweet treats, right? Makes you feel a little bit better. It's wonderful in tea as well. So bees, they actually make a lot of honey. Bees, a whole hive of bees can actually produce anywhere from 30 pounds to 100 pounds if it's a very large hive and they've been really busy bees. So 30 to 100 pounds of honey every single year. So in order to produce a single pound of honey, a colony of bees must collect nectar from 2 million flowers and fly about 55,000 miles. That is a crazy amount of work to get just a single pound of honey. So in order to get 30 to 100 pounds of honey in 1 year, that takes up about the lifespan of 800 bees. That's a lot of bees in 1 year to make anywhere from 30 pounds to 100 pounds of honey. So I want to give you guys a little pop quiz. I want to know if you guys know how long a honeybee actually lives. So go ahead, take this time to pause the video and talk it out with somebody near you. You're welcome to also share your answers in the comments as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you. The honeybee actually lives anywhere from 14 to 18 days. So definitely not a very long time. Maybe that is where the saying comes from, very busy like a bee, right? That's a ton of work for a lot of bees to do in just 1 year's time. Okay. So for bees, a little bit of honey actually goes a long way. So not only do we eat it as humans, bees obviously don't make honey for us, they make honey for themselves. So on average, a honeybee can produce about 1.5 teaspoons of honey over the course of its life. So to put that in perspective, 2 tablespoons of honey would be enough to fuel a bee's entire flight around the world. So if a bee lived long enough to fly all the way around the world, right, kind of like the movie Around the World in 80 Days, they would have to eat 1.5 teaspoons of honey. Not very much, right? So it's definitely packed full of energy for a bee. Okay, so let's get back to honey. So did you guys know that there's actually different flavors and different colors of honey? It's kind of amazing, actually. I didn't realize that there was different honey, but if you are definitely a honey lover, you might disagree. So its flavor is determined by the source of the nectar and where it's made. So what happens is the bees, they come along, they get the nectar from the flowers. So depending on where the bees actually collect the nectar, could give the honey a different taste. So there's actually a couple different kinds. There is linden honey, which is delicate and woodsy. There is buckwheat honey, which has a strong and spicy taste. And there's also a eucalyptus honey that when you eat it, it actually has sort of a menthol flavor. So kind of like an animal that you milk. If they get into something, maybe like an onion patch, you could perhaps taste that through the milk. So kind of the same thing with the honeybee. Depending on where they get their nectar, you might get some other interesting flavors. Okay, so I don't know about you, but I have thought about, especially a lot as a child, what in the world a honeybee does in the wintertime. So if you're like me and you've ever wondered, I actually took the time to look up and see what honeybees do in the winter. So what are bees doing now? So bees, they actually work all summer long to actually collect all the honey that they get in the hive. So they actually use the honey that they make all summer long to sustain the entire hive, right? It's their kind of their food source. So during the colder months, bees occupy their time by clustering themselves around the queen. So imagine this, right? So the bees, they huddle around their one queen bee and they actually shiver. Okay, so their bodies fill the hive with warmth. The more they shiver, the more warm they can make themselves and make the whole hive as well. But it actually takes the bees a lot of calories. They burn a lot of calories, right, when they're shivering. And honey is perfect because it's a very high energy diet. But there are definitely many values of honey. So not only is honey great for bees, it's actually great for us too. Whether you like the taste of honey or not, it actually has some medicinal uses as well. So there is evidence of honey being prescribed as medical treatment as far back as ancient Mesopotamia. So because honey, the way it's acidic and the way that it doesn't really have much moisture, they already know that it doesn't grow bacteria. For years and years, they have actually used honey to treat wounds with the thought of if honey can't get bacteria, maybe your wound can't either if your wound is covered. So a lot of people actually use honey for things today as well. They'll use them for treatment as dandruff, summer ulcers, and even seasonal allergies. I also know a lot of times they even may put honey in very small children's cough syrup as a natural remedy to coat a throat. So there's definitely a lot of different ways you can use honey. I think you could come up with multiple ways that you remember your own family or maybe you used honey in the past. So I want to leave you guys with a little bit of trivia. So I hope you are kind of paying attention. I added some trivia in here about what we already talked about, but I also added some new things in there for the bee lovers to make it a little bit more challenging. Okay, here we go. How many species of bees can make honey? Have you ever thought about that? Does every bee make honey? All right, so there are actually 20,000 species of bees on Earth, and only a mere 7 species can actually make honey. There are only 7 species of honeybees out of 20,000 species of bees. So there's only 7 species able to make bee honey after 20,000 different species cannot. Excuse me. Okay, moving on. True or false? The honeybee species are the only bees to make honey. Well, I've never heard of a bear making honey or even a bird, but this is actually false. In Mexico, there is actually a wasp known as the Mexican honey wasp. They actually make a ton of honey. But you have to be really careful if you decide to eat some of this Mexican wasp honey. They actually like to get nectar from poisonous flowers. So a lot of times that their honey will actually be poisonous. So we don't suggest that you should maybe try that or ingest that. Okay. How much honey can a busy bee colony make? So how much more honey can they make than that they actually need to get through a winter? All right, I hope you had enough time to think about that. So bees actually make 3 times as much honey as they would actually need for their entire hive to survive all winter. They actually make a ton. So a lot of times beekeepers, they actually do take a lot of honey from these hives. But as I said, bees often make 3 times as much as they would need to survive for the whole winter. So they really do make a lot. Okay, so last but not least, true or false? Without the honeybee, crops would be much easier to grow. All right, guys, I hope that you thought a little bit back to school and maybe you can remember. So this is actually false. The environment depends very much on bees. So like we said, bees often travel up to 55,000 miles a year, which is a ton. So the whole way they are collecting nectar, but as they do, they're getting those little pollen on their legs and they're crossing them from flower to flower across farm fields and everything else. So bees actually pollinate $20 billion worth of U.S. crops each year. So thank you guys so much for joining me with this discussion about honeybees. I hope that you learned something new today. Please, as always, leave something maybe that you learned in the comments. I would love to get a conversation going between all of us. As always, if you have any suggestions for some new videos, go ahead and leave those in the comments. And as always, I hope to see you soon.